In my dark days, when I was stuck in Wyoming, I couldn't leave the county because I had to go blow in the machine every morning after one of my DUIs. In the mornings, I had my Bible and I would read Proverbs, and I mostly read the Psalms, and it would grip me to my core. It started to resonate with me in a new way because I was at my darkest point. So much that by night is when I was playing Russian roulette. I was like, my son, my daughter, my wife are better off without me. And I would put 3 in the chamber, staggered, spin it, click. Half pissed off that it didn't go off and half relieved. I don't know. I don't have language to describe that. That happened. And then the next morning I'd wake up and I would be in the Word again. And so it was like this dark and light. You're not alone, and you're worthy. You're worthy of love and acceptance, and the narrative can change in what you think about yourself. And it's not easy. The narrow path is not easy. But as a man who has been on the brink of losing it all, and now has been every part of my life and story's been redeemed, I'm just telling you it's worth it. And you don't have to do it alone. Yeah. And we're not supposed to do it alone.
Yeah. If you're new or watching this as a replay, welcome. We're so glad that you're here. Please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and consider, if you're able, to become a paid subscriber on defenders-live.com. Your support is the only way I'm able to continue doing this labor of love. And also, if you're looking for exceptional firearms and self-defense training, go to defenders-usa.com and look at the calendar to see what's coming to your area this year. Jeremy Morris possesses that unique ability to make everyone he meets feel like he is their best friend. He has spent a lifetime amassing friendships that last and making each of those who are lucky enough to know him feel loved and cherished. Jeremy Morris is a husband and a father first, a business owner, and the co-founder of Wild Courage. Wild Courage is a nonprofit geared around men sharing stories of hope and redemption with the goal of becoming all that we were created to be. Does this sound familiar? Did you guys watch last week's show? This sounds oddly familiar. Jeremy and his wife, Mary, live in Idaho, where they raise some Angus cows, a colt now and then, and 3 wild sons, and they have a daughter who is also out of the house. So Jeremy says, I am honored to be the man married to Mary. We've been through hell and back together. Our bond is unbreakable because of God and not giving up. She is a fighter and a light. We have 3 amazing boys and a daughter who I'm proud to call my own. We have a beautiful, full life that I truly enjoy. I get to be a part of the Wild Courage team and have a heart to share stories of hope and redemption for the hopeless man. He says, I have lived a wild life, but God has been with me on the hardest days and nights. My eyes are wide open and full of wonder and excitement for what is coming. God never gave up on me. He knows that sometimes people take a while to find their way, and I am living proof. I desire to keep sharing those stories and being real. Wild Courage is a place where you can show up as you are without expectations or judgment. At Wild Courage, you'll find a tribe of brothers unafraid of the deep, dark places. Knowing you're not alone creates hope, and your story matters. Wild Courage is founded on the principle that hope comes from hearing, and it takes courage to share. There is great hope that comes from hearing redemptive stories. One of the greatest gifts we could give ourselves and others around us is to say yes to the narrow path of our healing journey. Let's learn more about Wild Courage and talk to Mr. Jeremy Morris. Let's welcome him onto the show. Hey, Jeremy.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. It's my pleasure. I'm very excited about this interview. I know that was a long intro for you, but all of the things that I said, actually, that were quoting you, I felt like were very valuable things. And we spoke earlier about how important that we both feel that authenticity and genuineness is shown through the camera lens nowadays. You know, it seems like in many places we don't get a lot of that anymore. And I think people are craving that. So thanks for what you do.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
I first of all, I don't know your story, so I don't know what you've got time for here, but I am curious about it because where you are now, it sounds like isn't anywhere near where you started from. And I learned about you. I caught wind of Wild Courage through the Western Horseman magazine. So that's how I kind of was like, wait a second, this is a guy encouraging people to share their stories and talk about mental health in the Western world, in the Western, lifestyle industry. This is really important. On my show, we've been talking about mental health and courage in that area, particularly in first responders, law enforcement, and veterans. And I'm seeing a lot of parallels here between that and the Western lifestyle culture, because that's a culture of men who are raised to be tough, right? And not really show emotion. And so is that how you were raised too?
Yeah, for sure. It's you grow up hearing these things, rub some dirt on it. It's a long way from your heart.
Yeah.
And growing up in the cowboy culture my whole life, that's just kind of what you do. You don't you just sweep everything under the rug, right? It took me a lot of years to get to a place of reaching rock bottom to where it was literally life or death for me to I remember asking myself a question: why do I continually show up the way that I do? And that just led me on this 14-year journey of self-discovery and figuring out why I was trying to drink myself to death and suicidal. And on the outside, I had it made. I had an incredible wife, a daughter, and a newborn son, and was making a lot of money and had a lot of clout in the community I was in the horse world, and everything I had strived for my whole life. And it didn't matter. I was miserable and running from my past. And at one point I got in a lot of trouble with the law, and I had to face some of those things. And I remember sitting there in a counseling deal that the state of Wyoming was making me go to for another DUI. And I just remember thinking, I'm going to embrace this process and see where it goes. My wife had just left me and taken my son, and rightfully so. She should have. And I felt like that was like the crossroads I came to of buying into a narrative victim or taking some ownership of not only the pain that I'd caused other people, but how did I get here? Because I think so many people stay in hiddenness and hide from their realities of their childhood or unprocessed pain, I like to call it, and find different coping mechanisms. Some are deemed healthy, right? Like, oh, that guy's such a hard worker. That gal works so hard. And you can be on the run. You can work out. You can work super hard and be successful. But what's going on the inside is what I found the healing journey began for me.
Man, this could not be better timing than to have you on this show. Gosh, I wish you could have watched the interview last week that I did with my friend Brian Hill, and we swapped roles, because one of my biggest fears was to be interviewed by someone else, because I too have been exploring those deep, dark caves. I call them dark caves. You call them deep, dark places. Same thing.
Yep.
But I talked about in that interview about how my faith has really helped me have the courage to go to those deep, dark places and know that I'm not actually alone in that. And that has been really helpful. And once that light is shed into those dark places, what I learned anyway was that the idea of what I was afraid of was worse than the actual looking at it, not that it wasn't hard. What's that?
1,000,000%.
Totally true, isn't it?
Yeah, because I say this often, but what we're really afraid of, I believe, is because God so wired us for connection that inside we have this narrative of, if you really knew me, there's no way you could like me. If you really knew either what I've been through or the things I've done or thought, there's no way you could like me, let alone what we're all craving is love and acceptance. Love's not even close to being on the table, right? Because of that narrative. If you knew me, you wouldn't like me. Forget about loving me or accepting me. And that fear is what keeps us from vulnerability. Yeah. And I think that vulnerability is scary, to your point, but it's also the antidote to shame. Yeah. And I feel like when we have some of us that have crazy stories, that shame keeps us in hiddenness and affects our self-worth and what we think to be true about who we really are. Not even how people perceive us, but how we perceive ourselves, right?
Yeah. Because one of the stories that I used to tell myself was that nobody cares and suck it up and do it yourself. Nobody's going to help you. Nobody's going to come. And I've been proven wrong so many times, especially recently as I've opened myself up to new possibilities. And I think that really that begins with learning how to be aware that you even have these stories and patterns, right? And to me, that has been a huge step in progress, because that awareness becomes this like almost like third party observer, like, whoa, uh, when you have a really strong reaction to something, instead of looking at that and trying to shove it down, you can look at it with curiosity and go, what is that really about? Like, where does that come from? Is that kind of like where it began for you, or what were some of the first steps in that process for you that you remember?
Well, I'd blown up my life. And again, it kind of goes back to that court ordered therapy that I had to go outpatient rehab kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'd just gotten my 4th and 5th DUI. My wife, like I said, had moved out and moved on. I was at the bottom. I'd lost everything that I had fought for. And I was just on the run. And
Mm-hmm.
in hindsight, you get to look back at your life objectively. And I looked at the patterns I'd created in my life of the cowboy lifestyle, especially celebrates moving, right? And it's like I moved every 6 months, and I was just on the run from my life in my childhood that involved a lot of sexual abuse. And as a man and as a cowboy, there's no way you're going to be able to talk about that. So I just tried to drown myself in vodka and maintain the facade that, I mean, we were going to church and doing all the right things in small groups, and I was going to church hungover, and the shame of all of that. I would go to Celebrate Recovery to get my wife off my back and get a pint of vodka for the drive home. I mean, it was so dysfunctional because of the amount of pain that I was in, of how in the world am I ever going to deal with the trauma from my childhood as a man and as a cowboy. There's no way out of this thing. And I remember taking a look at it, and it's so surreal we compartmentalize our trauma and our pain so well, and we bury it in those dark places that it was almost like it didn't happen. And until I started to unpack that and the pain that it caused me and how dysfunctional I showed up in all my relationships, and coming from, my dad, I think, was married 5 times and my mom 3. And it was never modeled to me what a healthy marriage or relationships really looked like, on top of all my childhood sufferings. It wasn't until I started getting help for unpacking that and all that comes with that I started to get tools in how not to self-sabotage myself. There's this fine line of being a victim and having grace for yourself that I had to walk for a few years. Of the things that happened to me were horrible and dark, and the mess that I made because of those. So I needed to own one side of the street and face the music. I was in a lot of legal trouble. And my wife had left. So I had a lot of self-hatred, which led me to 5 days with bouts of playing Russian roulette, and then finding compassion for myself in my story. And that's really hard to do. It's hard for two things. We can't reconcile two things being true at the same time, especially big emotional things of, I've made a huge mess of my life and hurt a lot of people. I need to own that. And on the other side, recognizing the things that happened to me weren't my fault, and go on the healing journey of learning to have grace for myself in that, but also the ownership side of the harm that I had caused because of the things that had happened to me. And I think that that's a really tricky space to figure out. And there's no way I could have done it without swallowing my pride and getting help.
Yeah. And I think, just my opinion, the process of forgiving yourself is really powerful as well, and really difficult, because not to excuse away any of the things, that we've done in our past, but just to look at them and say, sometimes it kind of made sense. That's why I acted that way, or why I did that, what other options did I see at the time? I didn't see any other options at the time, doesn't make it right, but it does help kind of make it make sense a little bit more, for me anyway. That's my experience.
It's very validating to know that you're not messed up.
Yeah. That's normal for that particular circumstance. Yeah.
This is what usually happens if you experience this kind of trauma.
Yeah.
And for me, when I got with a counselor that started helping me unpack that, it was like this huge relief that I'm not that effed up. Like this is psychologically what happens to someone who's suffered this kind of abuse. These are the defense mechanisms that people usually go to.
Yeah.
And why we do the things that we do. So it was again this weird tension, if you will, of that's normal behavior and ownership of, yes, there's grace for me and I need to find that. And yes, I've hurt a lot of people because of this. So it's really tricky. And I think that's where some people choose victimhood and they just stay in the cycle of brokenness and doing the same things over and over again. And there's never any ownership of the things that they did because of it. And that's super empowering to own your story on both sides of it, to find the healing and find the grace on the things that weren't your fault. And it's super empowering to start the process of what I think starts with humility, of cleaning up the messes that you've made because of it.
Humility. It's a very important word, isn't it?
Yeah, it's one of our core values at Wild Courage. And I think without it, I just see in this work with that we do with men, it's non-negotiable humility, because as men, we like to hide behind these tough, got it figured out exteriors. And it's self-protection. I get it. And I have compassion for guys that hide behind it. I used to be the guy that showed up and was always the biggest guy in the room because I was the most insecure. Back to that. If you really knew me, you wouldn't accept me. So I gotta figure out subconsciously how to be liked, how to be loved. And so I was always the funnest guy in the room.
Yeah.
I would always need to show up big. And I made a lot of emotional based decisions that went both ways. It made me the funnest guy in the room, and it put me in jail a lot too. And I hurt a lot of people because of those big emotional based decisions, you know?
Yeah. And I don't want to stereotype the, cowboy community, but boy, that sounds familiar. It sure does. That is.
And that's why it was a perfect fit for me. You got celebrated for partying and drinking whiskey and riding bucking horses, which I did a lot of, and all the things, and moving a lot was celebrated. So it fit me perfectly because I just was on the run through my whole late teens, all of my 20s into my mid 30s. I just was on the run from those dark places.
I just gotta say thank you for what you're doing. You are touching so many lives, and the courage that you have stepped out and shown is an unbelievable example for so many people, men and women alike. Doesn't matter. That takes a ton of courage to be that vulnerable and that honest, and to show that humility that I see in you right now. I didn't know you back then. I can only imagine, but I've met quite a few guys like that in the past. It's a crazy, wild ride we're all on. We're all in different, parts of our own journey.
Yep.
But I think the value in you opening the door for maybe someone who's listening right now, and just having that crack of light come through that door could be someone's saving grace,
Well, thank you. I think the thing that I didn't expect was how many, because I've been so vocal about sexual abuse and my story. I'm blown away by the amount of men that have reached out to me and said, I thought I would take this to the grave, but some of these same things have happened to me. And it messes me up because I never thought that this was such a widespread thing with men in general, but in the cowboy community. I'm just grateful that I've received so much healing and have the support of my marriage, that God has redeemed our story, that I have the support of my wife, and I have some gray whiskers, and I'm less. One of the cool things about going on the journey is I care less about what other people think of me now, because my identity isn't rooted in the facade that it used to be of, I used to hide behind the belt buckles that I would win, right? And that was my identity, or how good of a roper or horseman or whatever I was. And so that's strengthened me to have the support that I do to share my story. And it's overwhelming that there's so many other men out there that have experienced the same thing and are blowing up their lives the same way I was. I would have never guessed it. So it's been very humbling, and very terrifying. The first time I told my story was on a podcast that has millions of downloads. Like, it's a monster podcast.
What is it? I want to listen.
This was a few years ago. It's called The Connected Life.
Okay.
And Justin is the host of that podcast. And I trust him because we have a cool connection. And he was somebody that walked with me for a long time in my healing journey. And so I was so scared, and I shared the depth of my story on there. The opposite thing happened. I couldn't believe you mentioned it earlier, the thing I was scared of. If you knew this about me, you would look at me different and shrink back from me. And I was overwhelmed by the support and messages. And he would send me messages that he got from all over the world, literally, of how it's what the language I like to use around this space is it gives permission.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, somebody's story doesn't have to be just like mine, but what it does is it gives people, men and women, permission to the invitation of looking deeper.
Yeah.
And asking themselves the same question of, why do I show up the way that I do in non-healthy ways? And it's very permission giving to share your story and start investigating it, which is what kind of Wild Courage has turned into.
Hey guys, I would like to invite you to something new that I'm offering. I am going to be hosting a live Zoom call once a month for my paid subscribers. I really want to offer something special, something valuable, and something with a personal touch to you every month. And this is my way of helping you guys on your journey. And what you can expect is a variety of different topics, all within 4 buckets that I talk about on Defenders Live, which are health and well-being, mental and emotional health, spiritual fitness, and self-defense. So once a month, I am going to be presenting some questions to you. During that Zoom call, we're going to have a conversation live, and there's a good chance that the founder of Defenders USA, Adam Winch, might be on that call as well. So I invite you to join me on the Defenders Live community. As a paid subscriber, you will be getting emails about these once a month. You can sign up for this by going to defenders-live.com and becoming a paid subscriber. I hope to be talking to you soon and seeing you in the live Zoom calls. Thank you so much for your support of Defenders Live. Yeah, and I want to go into that here in just a little bit. But first, I want to ask you about your faith, because I have a sneaking suspicion that your faith in that journey was probably a really important part. So I'm just curious what role that played in your healing.
So, backstory, I grew up in the church every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night. So I had this solid foundation. And the second I left home to move to Wyoming to go work on a ranch and rodeo, I always had my faith, but I didn't live it at all. And I started on the run. The second I could leave home, I did. Yeah. I have language for it now. What I couldn't reconcile was the things I grew up hearing in church with my own story. Yeah. God is good. And then everyone says all the time, God is in control. And not to get off in a deep theological
do rant, what you want, Jeremy. You go there.
The denomination that I grew up with, God's sovereignty was God's in control, right, of everything. And everything happens for a reason. I could not reconcile that with what happened to me. I didn't want any part of a good God who is love if he orchestrated the horrible, dark things that happened to me as a little boy over and over and over again. And again, I didn't have language for it at the time. Looking back now, I wanted nothing to do with religion or this God who everyone said was so good and was in control of everything. So in my dark days, when I was stuck in Wyoming, I couldn't leave the county because I had to go blow in the machine every morning after one of my DUIs. In the mornings, I had my Bible and I would read Proverbs, and I mostly read the Psalms, and it would grip me to my core. It started to resonate with me in a new way because I was at my darkest point. So much that by night is when I was playing Russian roulette. I was like, my son, my daughter, my wife are better off without me. And I would put 3 in the chamber, staggered, spin it, click. Half pissed off that it didn't go off and half relieved. I don't know. I don't have language to describe that. That happened. And then the next morning I'd wake up and I would be in the Word again. And so it was like dark and light. It was like literally by the time it got dark, the devil had a hold of me and my mind so much that it was not worth it anymore, the torment that I was under. And then by morning, I was like, I'd have all this hope. And so that sent me on a journey, knowing that when I left Wyoming and returned to my wife and son in Arizona, and she began to move out, I was like, I'm going to go figure out who I am to God. And I literally went in my Bible and I bookmarked every single place where he called me his beloved. And that's what kept me moving forward. Because outside, my life was falling apart. The shame of all of it and the self-hatred that I had in that conflict. And I began to relearn what my identity was and who I was in him, outside of all the BS that I had made it to be my entire life, because it was all stripped away. I lost my house, my 6-figure job, my marriage, my clout, all the crap that I thought that I hid behind that mattered. It was all gone, all of it. Truck, I mean, everything.
Wow.
And so I love this quote that says, from rock bottom is the place in which I rebuilt my life. And that's where my faith became my faith. And not my parents, not my grandparents, whom I'm so grateful for the foundation that I was raised in, and for my family that prayed for me all those years that I was on the run and making a mess of my life. But I had to go on the journey to figure it out for myself, and not what somebody else told me from a pulpit, to be honest with you. And that was a journey that my wife from a safe distance watched for 4 years.
Wow.
And more importantly, I was a full-blown functioning alcoholic, drinking so much vodka every day, shoeing horses and doing all the things. And when I got arrested and put in jail in Wyoming, my prayer in jail that night changed from, God, get me out of these circumstances. I've been sleeping on the couch. I'm not having sex with my wife, all the external things of God, get me out of my circumstances, which was usually the only time I prayed. To, I feel like it was one father pleading to another father that this can't go on. And I needed, not out of my circumstances, but I needed a miracle with alcohol. And I don't care what anybody thinks or their theology, but I literally am telling you, God took alcoholism from me that night in jail.
Wow.
I should have went into, what do they call it when you come off of alcohol?
Detox, or no, withdrawal.
Withdrawal. I should have gotten violently sick as much as I had been drinking leading up to that point. Never got sick. I've never been tempted to have a drink of alcohol since that night. Now, my life didn't get better. It got a lot worse after that.
Did it?
Because I had to go through a lot. However, I didn't have to struggle with that anymore. And I'm so grateful that God met me in jail that night and took that from me. I mean, I have 4 whiskey bottles sitting on my shelf right here from our last retreats that have some in them. It's something we do at Wild Courage because we believe in choice and freedom. And so there's guys like me who don't drink, and there's guys that have a drink of whiskey around the fire. And then at the end of the retreat, everybody signs the bottles, and we keep them here as a monument of freedom and choice, and not more rules. But anyway, so that's to answer your question kind of in a long way. My faith is, I wouldn't be alive without it. And it's my personal relationship with God, and understanding what it looks like to be a son of the King of Kings. And we're in a fallen world, and there's opposition, and
strong opposition.
Especially in all the times, I think people are like, oh, the world's never been darker and this and that. I'm like, just go read the Old Testament. I read the Old Testament from start to finish last winter, and it's like, there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
It's not any darker now than it ever was. It's like I tell my boys, it's easy to be a light right now. It's easy to stand out.
Yeah.
It's easy to give hope.
That is really powerful. I really appreciate you unpacking that the way that you did, and taking us through that journey. And it just makes me wonder if there's somebody watching who's really struggling with something right now and maybe hasn't come to faith in the way of having a personal relationship with God. What would you say to that person? Like, what did that look like I assume you were in a jail cell that night in Wyoming. What did that look like? Was that a humbling of your heart? What did that feel like? What did that look like? How did I think people think there's some kind of recipe or formula to it. And there's not. It's just in my opinion, it's an honesty. It's here I am and I'm a mess.
Yeah, I think this is where the stigma of church, where it gets messy, is like the Father, he knows already.
Yeah.
But our pride, that's why I'm circling back to humility.
Mm-hmm.
Just read Proverbs. I mean, it's like, it's obvious that a prideful heart doesn't get us very far. So to me, it was just humbling myself and being honest, having an honest conversation with God.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't need to look like we think it does in the places he'll meet us. And we don't have to get cleaned up before we go to him.
Yeah.
It's wherever you're at and it doesn't matter. And I think that I got to be careful because I go to church and I love church, but I think the manipulation around fear keeps people from having honest conversations with God.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not scary. It's not supposed to be a scary thing. And he's not afraid of our messiness. He's just not.
Yeah.
And that's what we see so powerful at our Wild Courage Fires is we just invite God into the messiness of it all. That's all we do. And we have people that come that are agnostic and represent every denomination from Mormons to Catholics to, like I said, people that have a lot of church hurt and want nothing to do with God. And we're like, cool, tell him about it.
Mm-hmm.
He's not offended by us. We think we're running around and we're offending God. And it's like, he's not offended by us. It's no different than when your kid's 3 years old and you take away his toy and he's just learning how to talk. And he's like, yeah, I hate you, and throws a temper tantrum. And you're like, come here. And you get him in your arms and you're like, I know you don't mean these things. You don't have an understanding because we're so circumstantial and emotional driven beings that we can't sift through it all. And I don't know. I think to answer your question, I think that I'm really sorry to everyone that has experienced church hurt. I don't think that God is going to show up in the way we think he's going to, or the way that we're afraid if we don't show up right, he's not going to show up. Mm-hmm. And just invite him into the messiness of this life because it's really messy and it's really beautiful all at the same time. And he's not scared of any of it.
Yeah. No, nothing surprises him. Yeah. That is very well said. So let's talk a little bit about Wild Courage, what it is, where, when, how people can learn more about it. And where did this idea come from, Jeremy? You said you're the co-founder of Wild Courage.
So I love that all the guys that we co-founded this with, we all have different origin stories of where it started because it's such a personal journey. For me, it started with the courage to share my story and the fruit that came out of that and the healing that came from me sharing that story. Mm-hmm. To the point of probably 2 or 3 months after I did that first podcast I shared with you earlier, everyone's like, you really need to listen to it. I'm like, I can't stand the sound of my own voice. Like, right. Which obviously you have to get over if you do a podcast, but I didn't want to listen to it. And one night my wife came to me and she's like, you really should listen to it. This is months after it came out. So I went on the couch, my kids were playing and I put my earbud in and I started listening to it. And about 30 minutes into it, I started feeling emotional as I was sharing with Justin some of the trauma of my childhood. And I went in our bedroom and I started to weep. And I felt so much compassion for that little boy and what he went through. It was so weird hearing me share with somebody else and listening back to it. I would have never thought that would have been such a big part of my healing journey. Wow. And the compassion that I had for all that I had been through. It sounds kind of weird, but like,
no, I get it.
The third person of hearing this story. And I just started to weep and my wife came in and just kind of laid next to me and held me as I was sobbing because it was like, oh, you've been through a lot. You've really been through a lot. And it created this capacity for compassion for myself. I say this all the time, but you can't give away what you don't have. And I would say that that's when my capacity for compassion started to grow so much to the point that people started reaching out And I just started sitting with guys in this little office I'm in right now in my barn, listening and having compassion for them and their stories and what they've been through.
Yeah.
And again, it just goes back to they felt they had permission to share things with me.
Mm-hmm.
And overwhelmingly things that they're like, I never thought I would share this with anyone ever. I was going to take this to my grave. I've heard so many times, but they had invitation to share with me because I went first and I shared all these things. And so for me, that was kind of where it was like, oh, there's healing happening with these men sharing. And then I would go, I co-own a business, and we would have these business meetings with me and my business partner and one of our employees, and we'd sit around our board room and just invite each other into what was really going on in our lives with our marriages and the doubts we had as fathers. And we started recognizing that we weren't the only ones thinking this. We all felt like we were not good dads. And that just led us into, and we started inviting other guys into our boardroom and sitting around the table drinking coffee. And like one of us would go first, like I blew it with my kid and I feel shame about, I don't feel like I'm being a good dad, or I got in this huge fight with my wife, and just being vulnerable. And it became like, I hate this word safe place, but I don't know any other way to say it.
It's a real thing though.
And we started inviting my outfitter buddy, and he would bring his hunting guides. And pretty soon there's a bunch of grown men with beards and do these gnarly things in the woods, and cowboys. And we're all sitting around crying, having compassion for each other, saying, it's okay. I feel the same way. You're not alone.
Yeah.
And so much about hiddenness is you feel alone in your junk. You're like, again, it goes back to acceptance and being loved. And it's like, we started finding the opposite to be true. I'm going to be vulnerable and take a chance on vulnerability with these men that I trust. And what I'm feeling back is not rejection, but I'm feeling acceptance. And these guys really care about me, and they really love me, even though I'm falling short as a husband, a father, a businessman, whatever. And so that just turned into more discussions about, wow, there's something on this. We're all getting healthier. We're all becoming better husbands and fathers and encouraging each other. And that guy has older kids than me, and he's sharing with me what worked with his young boys. And it's encouraging me. And I'm learning from guys, again, comes back to humility. I don't have it figured out, but that guy, he does in this area. And I'm going to humble myself and ask him questions.
Yeah.
And then we're like, well, what if we did this around a fire? And there's something ancient about men sitting around a fire, and generationally speaking, wisdom that's handed down from one generation to the next that used to happen around this sacred fire. And it's gone. And that was at the beginning of COVID. So everybody's in isolation.
Wow.
And you're hearing all the statistics of, everyone being isolated and men being alone, and there's no community. And so it was like God's perfect timing. We started a fire, and we invited guys to come, and we would go first, and we would share and be honest and vulnerable with what was going on. And then a couple guys would show up, and then it'd be a month and nobody'd show up. And we're like, we're going to do this whether anybody shows up or not, because we're becoming better husbands and fathers and men because of it. Make a long story short, about the same time, I was always captivated by redemption stories.
Yeah.
Like guys somebody that's been through hell and made it to the other side is so encouraging. And that's kind of where I thought, what if I did a podcast? And I know nothing about this space. And as you and I know nothing about technology. What if I just interviewed guys that had these badass, gnarly redemption stories to give hope to the 20-year-old that thinks no one would understand what he's going through? Because we don't share our stories and we don't take the chance of vulnerability, we just think we're alone in it. And so I started interviewing guys and figured out how to do the whole podcast thing. And, my wife would listen to it, maybe two other people. And I was like, same thing about kind of the fires. Like, I'm going to do this whether anybody listens or not.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of, we always say God's kind of breathing on this mission. And now I think we have 20 plus fires going all around the country in Canada.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah. And I don't even know really, because I don't talk about the fires a lot on the podcast, but I think that's how mostly people have found out about it. And so, yeah, we just create this space where guys can come and show up as they are, because it doesn't happen at church. It doesn't happen at Saturday men's pancake breakfast at church. I haven't seen it happen because we got to protect the facade.
Yeah.
And I get it. I get it. And the church isn't built to do what we're doing. It's come sit at a fire and maybe take a chance on being honest with where you're at in life. And we have rules: no preaching, no teaching, no advice.
That's really important. Yeah.
It's so powerful to be seen and heard and your pain validated. It's so healing. And we've seen so many crazy things, and what we've gotten really, really good at. And I think the thing I'm proudest of us is the Bible talks about rejoice with those who are rejoicing and mourn with those who are mourning. And we've gotten really good at protecting that to the point of we've walked with guys through the loss of a child, to people getting marriages being redeemed and getting back together, from both ends of the spectrum. And we don't try to fix anybody. We don't try to have any answers. We just sit with guys in the pain, or we wipe tears off of our face because this guy and his wife just lost, a child. And we're rejoicing with this guy because he got a promotion, or he had a breakthrough in his marriage. And we've just gotten really good at holding the tension of the reality of this life. It's both really, really hard and messy, and it's really, really beautiful. And we embrace all of it because that is the reality of the life that we live in. And so guys just get to show up wherever they're at today, not where they hope to be, not where they were 5 years ago, today. And so it's just, I think we're 3.5 years into setting around a fire. And like I said, we've got them growing and going all over the place.
I cannot believe I've just now heard about this. I mean, I know God's timing is perfect. And actually, if you knew my story, you would be, I think, in awe of his timing. But yeah, I'm so excited about this. I'm so excited to share this with my audience. I did put up, got to put up this banner, thewildcourage.org. Is that where people find you?
Yeah, this is also good timing because we've taken the fire model and taken it to a retreat style.
Oh, really?
And so twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall, we have a Wild Courage retreat up in the mountains of Idaho at this cool lodge. And we've had a lot of guys come that have gone to a lot of men's retreats before, and that it's the resounding same answer to every person: this is nothing like any men's retreat I've ever been to. So they're very powerful and they're very intimate, and we give guys a lot of tools that want to become the men that they were created to become, but feel stuck and trapped. And we do grief recovery is kind of the theme of what we're doing this fall. And grief, people have a notion that it's about losing a loved one, which obviously it is. But we have a guy named Seth Dahl that comes and leads us, and we break up and do most of the work in small groups. And it's very powerful. And it's pretty intimate. We only take 30 guys. And then we have 2 leaders in each small group too, of guys that have done a lot of work and just are really good at listening to guys and their stories. And so it's very powerful. So that's coming up in November. We're super excited about
November. Okay. Perfect timing. Okay.
Yeah.
And so then the Wild Courage podcast can be found, I assume, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the normal places. And then you guys are on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as well.
Yep.
Wow. That's good. You're covering all your bases, it sounds like. And
well, my team is. I struggle with all of that. And I have a great team. And the guys that I do Wild Courage with, these guys are unbelievable. And yeah, it's just a really cool brotherhood that we've created. And there's some exciting things happening. A lot of women are really inspired by these stories, the podcasts of understanding their husbands better, which is something I wasn't expecting. And so it's early in the works, but we're starting to work on some things Wild Courage style for women also.
You are? I was going to ask. That's exciting. Okay, great. Well, I want to...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I want to be a part of helping spread that message. Once you get that going, let me know, because I know a lot of women that would be encouraged by that and be interested in that.
Yeah, we're super excited because the goal is like, what if one man went on the journey to get healthy and whole? Then he could start contending for his wife's heart and improving their marriage to model a healthy marriage to our children. That's how we're going to change this country.
Totally agree.
Is by modeling something different than what we had growing up with.
Yeah.
Because if we get healthy and whole enough, how cool is it that me and my friends, we sit around and talk about our grandchildren, our great grandchildren, and the heritage that we're leaving behind has nothing to do with money, but
Mhm.
healthy marriages.
Mhm.
And that's the ultimate goal with all of this. So we're trying to figure out the men thing, get that down, but our goal is healthy family and get marriages whole and healthy and operating at a high level, and show our kids how to do the same.
I think that is just such good work, Jeremy. I mean, that is a calling, truly a mission. And I'm so inspired by your story, by what you've shared with us. And I'm just so grateful that you took the time and said yes to come on this show. Do you have any parting thoughts for anyone that might be watching, who's touched by what you say, who's curious, who, might feel like you crack the door open for them just a little bit? What would you say to someone like that?
You're not alone,
Mm.
and you're worthy. You're worthy of love and acceptance, and the narrative can change in what you think about yourself. And it's not easy. The narrow path is not easy. But as a man who has been on the brink of losing it all, and now has been, every part of my life and story's been redeemed, I'm just telling you it's worth it. And you don't have to do it alone. And we're not supposed to do it alone.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you, Jeremy. You're a true gift.
Well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
It was fun.